While the army celebrated victory, one man stood outside the Prophet's tent with a sword drawn, not to protect his leader from an enemy, but to protect him from the woman inside. This is the story of Safiyya, who lost her entire family in the morning and became a bride by nightfall. Why were the companions so terrified of her? Today, we uncover the secrets buried in the oldest records of Khaybar. To understand why a guard was pacing outside that tent, we have to look at who Safiyya bint Huyayy actually was. She was not an ordinary captive. Safiyya was nobility, a princess in her own right, but in 628 CE, her world didn't just crumble, it was systematically dismantled. And the records of how it happened are even more chilling than you've been told. Safiyya's father, Huyayy, was the chief of the powerful Banu Nadir tribe. Her family was wealthy, proud, and influential, ruling from the massive stone fortresses of Khaybar. But as the dust of the siege settled, that status became her greatest danger. The siege of Khaybar ended in total defeat for Safiyya's people. Her husband, Kinana ibn al-Rabi, was captured alive. According to the early biography by Ibn Ishaq, Kinana was questioned directly about the location of the tribe's hidden treasures. When he refused to speak, the records state he was subjected to severe interrogation and ultimately executed. In a single afternoon, Safiyya's husband, father, and brother were all slain. She and her female relatives were led directly past the bodies of their fallen kinsmen as they were taken into custody. Her royal status was gone. She was now a captive of war, completely at the mercy of her captors. As the dust of battle settled over the oasis, the victorious army began the process of dividing the spoils of war. Captives of war were distributed among the soldiers. This was when a companion named Dihya al-Kalbi approached the Prophet and requested a female captive. The Prophet agreed, telling him to go and choose a slave girl. Dihya walked through the group of captives and selected Safiyya, unaware of her true identity. But when the other companions saw this, they were deeply troubled. They immediately went to the Prophet to object. They argued that because Safiyya was the daughter of the chief of the Banu Nadir, she was far too noble to belong to an ordinary soldier. They insisted she was only fitting for the leader himself. To resolve this, the Prophet called Dihya back. The historical records in Sunan ibn Majah show that the Prophet took Safiyya back and, in exchange, gave Dihya 7 slaves. What was it actually like for a woman whose life could be traded for 7 slaves in a single afternoon? While traditional sources frame this exchange as a way to elevate Safiyya's status by bringing her into the household of the Prophet, it presents a stark historical reality about the lack of agency experienced by war captives. The transaction was finalized, but this swap was just the beginning. What happened when the sun went down would lead to a vigil that historians still argue about today. This trade settled the legal dispute among the men, but it did nothing to settle the fear in the camp. As night fell, the focus shifted from the value of a captive to the threat of a survivor. The caravan moved away from the ruins of Khaybar, arriving at a campsite called Saba. Here, Safiyya was prepared for her wedding. In accordance with the customs, she was washed, and her travel-stained garments were replaced with clean, white bridal linen. But as she sat silently inside the newly pitched wedding tent, the camp around her was on edge. A woman of her status, whose world had been shattered only hours ago, was now entering the inner circle of the leadership. The physical battle was over, but the mental tension was just beginning. At the campsite of Saba, the wedding was consummated, but as the camp fell into deep sleep, one companion refused to close his eyes. Abu Ayyub al-Ansari spent the entire night pacing back and forth, holding a drawn sword. He was not acting on orders, he was acting on raw suspicion. Abu Ayyub's mind was fixated on a simple, terrifying calculation. The Prophet had killed Safiyya's father, her husband, and her people. Now she was alone in a tent with the man responsible for that destruction. To the companions, she was not just a bride, she was a potential assassin with the ultimate motive for vengeance. His overnight vigil is historical proof of the intense, raw tension that hung over this marriage from its very first night. When morning broke, the light of dawn revealed the exhausted but resolute guard. The tent flap parted, and the Prophet stepped out into the crisp morning air, stopping as he noticed Abu Ayyub standing there with his weapon ready. Surprised, the Prophet asked, "What is the matter, Abu Ayyub?" The guard did not hesitate, stating openly that he feared Safiyya would seek revenge because her father, husband, and people had been killed. According to the historical records, the Prophet did not reprimand him. Instead, he smiled at his companion's deep loyalty and prayed for his protection, asking God to guard Abu Ayyub, just as Abu Ayyub had spent the night guarding him. The crisis of the night was over, but the questions surrounding this marriage would endure for centuries. As we close the files on this investigation, we are faced with two sharply contrasting realities. On one hand, traditional accounts paint this as a story of honor and protection, a marriage that elevated a ruined princess to the highest rank as a mother of the believers. On the other hand, the sheer speed of the events, the loss of her family, the slave exchange, and a marriage consummated on the battlefield leaves a critical, unsettling question about survival and consent. The oldest records allow us to see both the sword outside the tent and the complex reality within it. But the final decision does not belong to the historians. It belongs to you. Was the guard's overnight fear justified, or did he misunderstand a story of deep survival? Let me know your truth verdict in the comments below.